Hello and welcome again to TelecomTV. I'm Martin Warwick and I'm talking with Don Clark of ETSI. Don, welcome. Good to see you again. It must be a month or two. We were last in Ireland, I think, last time we met.
Dublin, yes.
Dublin, yeah. You're part of the ETSI leadership team and have been from the get-go. During that time, which is now, 3.5 years plus, coming up to 4 years, you managed to maintain momentum that many in the industry didn't think you would. How have you done it? Are you pleased with it, and what's next?
Well, pleased with it, absolutely. I think the main thing is, though, that are we doing things that are useful for the industry? That's always been my mantra from the very beginning. What we set out to do was to create consensus amongst the operators and the vendors on what should be the common requirements for NFV, and that's what we set out to do at the beginning of 2013 when we started out on this thing, and we had a 2-year phase of work. And I started talking about sunsetting the forum. Right at the very beginning we said we're going to sunset at the end of 2014, the end of the 2-year phase. But as we went through and the work built, we went from a founding group of 7 operators to right now over 290 companies, which I think makes us one of the biggest forums around the industry now, certainly from my experience. We haven't seen any let-up in momentum at all. In fact, the problem's been the reverse. We've had to say, with such a growth of energy being applied by vendors and operators to this topic, how do we constrain the work and to what's really useful? And that has been the ongoing challenge. So the first thing I was advised to do by Pradeep Sen was to stop talking about sunsetting the forum, because it's obvious we weren't going to be able to do that for a number of reasons. First of all, it takes quite a bit to build a community, and I would say that what we have here as a community, as I've come to this conference, I encounter colleagues from vendors and operators that were there at the first event that we held 4 years ago, and they are working really hard. What we're also seeing is people that aren't so visible anymore within the ETSI environment because they're beavering away internally in their organisations. So we've transitioned from being a group of individuals that saw the future from an R&D perspective to a group of individuals that are now working on behalf of companies that are now seriously investing in deployment. So far from losing momentum, we've had to figure out a way in which we can control the amount of work that's going on in the forum.
So 2013, in a few months' time, we'll be getting on for 4 years. So you had a 2-year phase, a 2-year phase. Is there going to be a subsequent 2-year phase after that, do you think, Don?
There's already been agreement in principle by the Director General of ETSI that the IST can continue for another 2 years at the end of 2016.
Right.
So within the Network Operator Group, we've had a couple of initiatives that Klaus Martini of Deutsche Telekom and I have initiated, one of which is to first of all make sure that the work that is currently being or has just been approved in Dublin to be done is truly of value. So about 6 or 7 months ago, we did a prioritisation from the network operator side. We said these are the topics we want to see prioritised, and in the absence of infinite resources to do work, we wanted these particular topics to get the most attention, and we executed that to a mixed extent in Dublin. Some of the high priority work items weren't approved until actually a couple of weeks ago, simply because of the amount of work that was being done. And then going into 2017, we've already set out as a network operator group what we think are the priorities there. The priorities are certainly to address gaps in what we call stage 3 standards. Now, that's a kind of standards term for the protocols and APIs that you need actually to interoperate virtualized components constructed from NFV, and also understand what are the key requirements that need to be agreed in order for the industry to move forward now that we've done nearly 4 years of work. So that's actually a new initiative from the operator side to actually identify a process by which we can more intensively scrutinise the work so that we don't build. The point of the IST isn't to just try and boil the ocean, it's to try and get the real focus on what's of value for the industry, and that's really where myself and Klaus and the other leadership are looking at that, how we do that for the work in 2017 and beyond.
Now, ETSI is ETSI. There's a lot of hype and stuff in the industry about open and open source, as we've talked about before. Are you going to coexist? Does it matter whether there's open source is going to conquer the world as they seem to think they might, or or what?
Well, open source is a critical dynamic for the industry. It's without any doubt at all, open source has been incredibly beneficial to the evolution of this ecosystem already, whether it be in the kind of devices that people consume network services on, which are based on open source software. But increasingly, you're seeing operators more open to using open source within their environments. Because remember, for telecoms operators, deterministic performance and fairly rigorous adherence to project plans and investments means that you can't just say, oh, please would you produce this into an open source community. You have to go into those communities and actually drive those through contribution. And that's more difficult for network operators because typically we don't have software developers. In Cable Labs, we've been able to put in software developers in some critical projects that we've been interested in, for example, Open Daylight. But for operators, the open source solutions are going to be very important, if only because they drive innovations. I've said before, because it's an open, innovative environment, but also because we can prove many of the concepts using open source. So, for example, in the Cable Labs environment, we're focused very much on open source solutions. We put those together and we demonstrate concepts and we test concepts. And I was one of the initiators of OPNFV, for example, and OPNFV is about integration of open source components and proving that they can do carrier grade.
Final thing to you, we're running out of time, so a brief answer if you could, Don, but not too brief. Atlanta, NFV number 14 coming up shortly. What's going to be on the main agenda there?
Well, we're starting work now on as I said, the stage 3, which is to look at the protocols and APIs, and also looking at profiles of external projects such as OpenStack. What profiles are relevant to the operators? Can we get some clarity on those? What should we do about proof of concepts going forward? Things like plug tests, and in fact, some of the work going in the TST, the test working group, is incredibly exciting now because we're getting convergence on the test processes and the test methodologies for NFV. So far from now moving in, from a specification to deployment, we've moved specification to testing, and that supports deployment.
Great stuff. Don Clark, thank you.
Thanks, Martin.